Sarasota, Florida is a really good destination in itself, but for us it's a perfect day trip because it's only an hour approximately from the Tampa Bay area. I apologize for those boxes in the back. We need to stop it. We need to stop at Goodwill at some point, but we are headed to Sarasota today. It is a Monday, and I am so excited to get to go when maybe it's a little bit less crowded. We are going to go to the Ringling Museum, and I hear that there is free general admission on Mondays, or at least some Mondays. So really hoping that that's true today, but either way, I'm really excited to go there. We are excited to go there. I'll tell you more about the Ringling Museum when we get there, but it's my understanding, and I could be wrong when we get there and I learn a little bit more, is that it's a husband and wife, and they were the Ringlings, and they did...
That's who we are. We're husband and wife.
Yeah. They did the circus. The wife loved Sarasota, Italy, and so I'm not really quite entirely sure how that was all tied together, but we're going to learn more about that at the museum. I can't believe we haven't been there. We've lived here for almost 3 years, and we've known about it the whole time and yet haven't gone, so this is going to be an incredible experience. First things first, with every road trip, we are getting gas. We are at Wawa. We will go inside and get some coffee and just like a small breakfast because we are completely out of groceries entirely, pretty much. So the best part about driving to Sarasota from the St. Petersburg area, at least in my opinion, is driving over the Skyway Bridge. You've seen this a couple of times in some of my past videos, but I just absolutely love it. On this day, the water was absolutely gorgeous. It reminded me of the water in the Florida Keys. There were not too many boats out on this day, but it's probably because it was a Monday. And this here is actually Bradenton, which is also beautiful. We go through Bradenton quite often to get to Sarasota, depending on where we're going in Sarasota. And I've always wanted to spend more time there. I've always loved this view, and it always looks like there's so much stuff to do along the river here. We actually finally spent a full day in Bradenton this past weekend, so stay tuned for that video. The Ringling is kind of tucked away on the edge of town, so the drive out there is absolutely beautiful if you can look past my windshield, which desperately needs to be cleaned. I even jump to the museum itself, I wanted to talk about it a little bit because some of the stuff that I said in the introduction was correct, but then some of it I misspoke on just a little bit. I'm going to give more of an update, or sorry, an overview rather, of John and his wife Mabel in my next video. So I'm gonna mention this again later, but basically there was just too much to do on the property, so I'm dividing it up into more than one video. But in the introduction, I said that John and Mabel Ringling loved Sarasota, Italy, and I misspoke because they loved Sarasota, Florida, and they loved Italy. So I misunderstood that, and I just wanted to clarify that. When I was researching visiting the Ringling, I was a little bit confused about exactly what it was. There are so many buildings on site, so I just wanted to clarify that in case it was confusing for anyone else doing research as well. Basically, John and Mabel Ringling, when they purchased the property, they purchased 20 acres. That's a lot of land. So on that 20 acres, you have the mansion where they lived. You also have an art museum and you have the circus museum. And today we're going to be primarily focused on the circus museum because again, there is just so much to do that to cover it all in one video was just a little overwhelming, so I am just breaking it down a little bit. So make sure that you subscribe if you're interested in those other buildings, those other things to do on site, because they are definitely coming within the next week. In addition to the art center, the circus museum, and the Ringling mansion, there are gardens, there are statues, and the property is waterfront right in Sarasota, so it's a beautiful place to be. So let's talk about the circus museum before I bring you inside with me. Some of those shots that you just saw were from the circus museum. The name of it is actually the Tibbles Learning Center. So inside you'll find real artifacts from the circus, you'll find a circus model, and you're going to find interactive exhibits is the word I was looking for. You'll find interactive exhibits as well. A lot of those interactive exhibits were closed when we were there because of COVID, but trust me, there was still plenty to do and see. My favorite part of the Tibbles Learning Center by far was the model circus. So basically a model maker named Howard Tibbles loved the circus when he was a boy, and he he used this to inspire the creation of a model circus. It's difficult to describe how amazing this is. Of course, I have tons of footage coming up that you'll see here in just a second, but he took 50 years to make this model circus. So it really captures how much work was put into the circus, how exciting the circus was, and so on and so forth. There is so much detail in this, and it really shows, like, it really gives you an idea of what the circus looked like. I know some of us have been to the circus as well. I know I went when I was a kid, and it was kind of fun to see this, how much work went into this by so many people to make it happen. So again, I'm going to show you the videos, of course. Just know that the videos don't do it justice, and I highly recommend visiting yourself. It is incredible. So of course, the Tibbles Learning Center was named after Howard Tibbles for his very hard work in creating all of these wooden figurines and so on. Lastly, before I jump into the Circus Museum, I just wanted to mention that the museum is free on most Mondays. We did have to pay an admission the Monday that we were there, so it's not free every single Monday. Also, the mansion that John and his wife Mabel lived in, it is huge and beautiful. That's going to be in my next video, but you can go inside that mansion for an additional fee. So that is not included in the free entrance on Mondays. And it is an additional charge if you are paying to enter the grounds. So that's helpful to know. Last but not least, I read a lot of reviews before we went, and we don't have kids, so I cannot personally speak to this, but a lot of the reviews did feel like it wasn't a great place for smaller kids. However, we did see a playground there located like outside, so I will kind of leave that up to you. I know that we're going over the Circus Museum today. I feel like the Circus Museum would be more appropriate for kids than the Art Museum, and so it's kind of they might not have been talking about the Circus Museum. They could have been just talking about the mansion or the Art Museum, but I think that that is just helpful to know, to maybe do a little bit more research or to watch the rest of this video to decide if you think it would be a good fit for your kids depending on their ages and that sort of thing. This is a 3,800 square foot model, which depicts the American Tented Circus. I'm reading from this sign here. So more than 13,000 people could enjoy this under the big top. As I mentioned, this setup is to truly depict what happened when the circus came to town. It shows all of the background work that went into the circus and made it possible, and throughout the display there were plaques throughout to explain each step of the process. So the circus traveled over 1,300 workers, 800 animals, and all of their equipment. Sometimes they would travel up to 15,000 miles to put on a show in 150 different towns. Once you see all of the work that goes into putting on the circus, you will see why those numbers are such a big deal. Just setting up for the circus was a big task in itself. The circus day began very early in the morning, typically before or around 3 a.m., when a group of men called the Flying Squadron carried equipment to lay out for the circus lot, and they started setting up the cooking tents. This was only the first section of the train. The second section of the train carried concession wagons, the canvas for the tent, and the poles for the tent. And then the third section of the train carried the wardrobe, seating, hardware, and props that went inside the tents. Finally, the last section of the train brought performers and some of the animals. They typically arrived pretty close to the showtime, so within a few hours of the performers' arrivals, the first day's performance would typically start. This is the cookhouse, which was the very first tent to get set up. That makes sense because everyone needs breakfast, right? The cookhouse prepared food for 1,300 workers and performers 3 times per day. Here we have the rest tents. These were set up for circus personnel such as the band and ushers. There were also rest tents for workers to sleep in between setting up the lot early in the morning and tearing it down late at night after the last performance. You also see a lot of spec performers in between some of these tents. Spec performers were basically elaborate floats and amazing costumes on both people and animals. This is really what typically made up the opening of the show, and they put as many people in this as possible, and it really helped to get the show started with a lot of magic and a lot of excitement. You can kind of see how they're lined up to get ready to go into the big top here. This leads up to the performers' entrance. So when it was showtime, performers entered through the backside opening. This was rightfully called the performers' entrance. The performers would wait right outside of the tent in that area until they heard the music, which cued their entry. This area shows the huge backyard area. This is where performers, staff, and workers spent their time when they weren't performing. There's not much more to add about that right here. You can just kind of take in all of the people. They are preparing for the show, taking care of their equipment, and just hanging out. I pan over to try to show how big the display truly was. It's something that's difficult to capture because I feel like the video doesn't do it justice, but hopefully you can tell. This also really shows how much work went into the circus because there are so many people here, hanging out and practicing. It really put into perspective how many people were a part of this. Also in this area, you see a lot of private tents. These private tents were reserved for the most famous center ring stars. Typically, if they had a tent or a private room, it was written into their yearly contracts. Often the performers would furnish their tents with things like chairs, blankets, rugs. Sometimes they would even bring their pets with them. Next, we have the performer's dressing tent. This is exactly what it sounds like, and it's where the performers would get ready. Their trunks would be placed in these tents with anything they needed for their act, except for special wardrobes and props. The tent was divided by canvas walls. Men went on one side and women on the other. This shows the sea elephant. It was one of the most popular attractions. The sea elephant weighed 3¼ tons, and he traveled in a specialty constructed water tank on the train. When he wasn't in the big top, he was housed in a tank inside his own tent, and he was fed 150 pounds of fish per day. The circus really became an American staple, and it was not uncommon for towns and cities to essentially shut down in order to allow its citizens to go to the circus. So in other words, a lot of the times schools would close and factories would close to make sure that everyone had time to attend the circus. It was a really big deal. When attending the circus, the visitors' first experience was on the midway. This is where they would start to see the sights. They would start to hear the sounds and smell the good food. Concessions would be up and running, ticket sellers were yelling to step right up, and you heard whistles directing you to the sideshows. And of course, you could also expect brightly colored wagons and banners. As far as concessions, you could expect a little bit of everything, similar to the concessions we see today. Back then, they sold dolls and other souvenirs. They even sold live lizards and kind of encouraged people that they were fashionable pets that they could wear. They also sold things like soda, popcorn, hot dogs, and cotton candy, and of course, ice cream. So again, a little bit of everything, and very similar to some of the concessions that we would expect at similar state fairs and things like that today. I mentioned the sideshow earlier, and you can see that here. It had very bright and huge painted images on the outside, and as I mentioned, this really added to the excitement before entering the big top. It had images as well that were very curious and interesting. So some of these images would be like the human pincushion and the fireproof man. The sideshow was sometimes called the kid show, and they also occasionally had people outside doing things like swallowing swords and stuff like that. It was the smallest of the 3 tents available for visitors to enter, and it required a separate admission. You may have noticed the ticket wagons. Basically, visitors had options to purchase general admission tickets or reserved seats for that day's performance. And here we have the main entrance. Visitors would make their way through this main entrance, and there was one side of the entrance where they could see exotic animals. So back then, this was typically the first time most people had ever seen any sort of animal from another continent. So they had elephants, lions, zebras, hippopotamus, giraffes, and even polar bears. They may also at times have orangutans and kangaroos. So that shows all the different animals and what the visitors could see on their entrance into the circus. One thing to note is that their cage wagons were very intricate. They were bright and beautiful. They had carvings. So that just was really shown here as well, the intense detail, not only in the circus, but also of the woodworker. A lot of the times these wagons also had panels that would go over those bars. That way the animals were safe during travel. And yes, that is the bathroom. I am telling you, this circus model left absolutely nothing out. Just like humans had tents, so did the animals. They were also given food according to their dietary needs. So some animals got fruits, veggies, and grains, whereas others were fed freshly prepared meat. Now we have the big top. This is the performance tent, and it's called the Big Top because, of course, it is the biggest tent on the lot. It was a lot of work just to put this tent up. Not only work, but skill and coordination, and it took a lot of practice. There were a lot of parts to this tent. It was a very big ordeal. At any given time during the circus, there could be a performance going on 3 rings, 4 stages around the track and in the air on the rings. So in 1926, the program for each show lasted 2.5 hours approximately, but that was without intermission. As part of this show, it typically included 800 performers in 22 different displays. It's hard for me to wrap my head around that, even though I'm looking at a real model of what it would have looked like. I went to the circus as a kid, but I don't remember it a ton. So this really is incredible. As far as seating goes, the Big Top could accommodate as many as 15,000 people. They had folding chairs along the length of the tent. Those were reserved seats and they were more expensive than general admission. General admission provided you with bleacher seats, and those were kind of along the curved ends of the tent. If all of the seats were sold, they would put straw in front of the stands for the kids. And when they had to do that, they called it a straw house. The circus also had dogs that performed. Most of them were strays or purchased from the pound because they found that mixed breeds were very smart and learned tricks very quickly. When they were not performing, they were kept in outdoor kennels, but they each had their own space in the wagon as well. Not only did the circus have performing horses, but they also carried 400 baggage horses. Basically, a baggage horse was a strong horse who helped work, so they would help pull the equipment, they would help to raise the poles and the canvas for the tents as well. The circus was often located across from the railroad station, which made it easier to get the equipment there and that sort of thing. The train depot became a destination point for special excursion trains that brought people to town for the show from the surrounding area. So on Circus Day, it was not uncommon for communities to more than double in size with all of the visitors. And I'm not sure if it's obvious here, but as I kind of move forward, you will actually see that we made a big full circle and we're kind of on the other side of the train. So when we first entered this exhibit, it also showed the train. It kind of shows that we made a big circle surrounding the circus when we arrived, and then we ended in the same place. After the circus, the train master was responsible for organizing the process of loading the circus train. So literally every part of the circus had so much planning put into it, so much intention to make sure that it went as it was supposed to go. So more than 150 wagons had to fit perfectly onto the flat cars. There just wasn't room for error. The train master knew exactly where to put each wagon on the train in order to make sure that the space was used correctly. The circus model that I just showed you was located downstairs, and then we headed upstairs. That view that I just showed you was their most interactive exhibit, which was closed, like I mentioned earlier, because of COVID. Once we got upstairs, we saw even more figurines. I could not believe it. These were even more detailed, or maybe they weren't actually more detailed, but we could see them more closely. This exhibit also just went on and on. I couldn't believe it. The detail on this is seriously incredible. I love this view because it shows some of the real pictures from the circus, and I love old true pictures like that. And then this view here offers a view of the model circus that we had just looked at downstairs. It kind of helps, I think, to show how huge the model was. Also on the second floor is kind of like a little, I don't know what else to call it except a ledge, and you can overlook this pond. There were tons of turtles. You see one right there, it's swimming, and before they were sunbathing. So right here you can see a whole bunch of them sunbathing, and that was really cool. This was one of my favorite parts of the upstairs display because it captured some of the magic of the circus. I really loved the costumes because I used to be in dance, and it really reminded me of all of the excitement of performance day. That's when all your hard work pays off and you get to wear the costume on stage. It was just a really exciting place to experience in the museum. The upstairs offered a lot of artifacts from the circus as well as more information on the circus. There was a timeline of the circus, but I'm going to be completely honest and admit that we did not read it. It's not because we weren't interested, it's because we took in so much information when we viewed the circus model downstairs. We just couldn't take in any more information. That's honestly a good sign of a really good museum, and I don't think that most people have that problem, so you might not relate to that at all. We are lucky to live close, so we plan to go back again, and we're going to start on the second floor the next time we go back so that we can read more about the history of the circus and its timeline. I hope that you found this video useful, and if you did, you will love our next video, which is going to include the other buildings on the Ringling Museum's property. So make sure that you subscribe if that is something that you're interested in, because those videos are coming soon. And if you did find this video enjoyable, it would mean a lot if you could give us a thumbs up, and we will see you next time.